Welcome to Stranger Than Fiction, where you can test your ability of keen observation. Listen to 3 stories and see if you can determine which one is stranger than fiction. Have you ever seen something so strange while browsing TV that it makes you feel odd? A seemingly innocent television segment coincides with some eerie happenings. Listen and see if this story has an air of truth. In the fall of 1987, local news channel WSB-TV2 of Atlanta, Georgia, was attempting to fill a scheduling gap in their Sunday morning lineup. After a few solicitations by local business owners, they decided to allow the young Reverend Marley Satch to take the available hour block to do a religiously themed show. It premiered October 18th with little promotion. The show was standard religious fare and consisted of the Reverend sitting in a simple chair reading passages from the Bible to the camera and discussing their interpretation and significance to our modern day-to-day life. The show received a reasonable number of viewers and continued to show into early December. It was then that the studio began to receive extremely strange complaints from viewers of Words of Light with the Reverend Marley Satch. The calls were from women, and only women, who vaguely referred to uncomfortable feelings they had at specific intervals during the program. They described feelings of nausea, back pain, dizziness, and blurred vision. These callers, for no discernible reason, were convinced that it was the viewing of this program that caused these symptoms. It was later determined, after 3 weeks of complaints, that these feelings were happening at roughly 12-minute intervals during the course of the program. The small studio staff checked all recording equipment, both audio and video, and found nothing faulty. When the Reverend was made aware of these incidents, he merely shrugged and stated, cryptically, that some can't handle the voice of God. The head of the studio, at a loss to explain the cause of these complaints, decided to continue running the program. By February, viewership had dropped sharply, and it was decided to pull the plug on the show. The studio head figured it would be more prudent to spend as much time as possible on the news story that had the other 2 local news networks abuzz: the miscarriage epidemic. Starting sometime in November, the number of healthy pregnant miscarrying in the Atlanta metropolitan area had reached over 300. The CDC could find no discernible cause for this terrifying occurrence. The Reverend took the show's cancellation with what could only be described as abject indifference. When informed, he made no protest, merely nodded, almost knowingly. He left the studio after the last episode was filmed without so much as a word and dropped off the face of the earth. No one ever heard from him again, not his former congregation or any member of the church. The studio moved on, filling the slot with an infomercial, and continued to concentrate on the miscarriage story. A year and a half later, an intern at the WSB studios discovered the tapes of the Word of Light and began going through them in an attempt to find stock footage for an upcoming piece the station was doing on the impact religion had on the city. The Atlanta incident, as the miscarriage epidemic became known in the medical journals, petered out 3 months after the studio cancelled Reverend Satch's show and had already begun to fade from the public consciences. As the intern went through the tapes, he accidentally made a disturbing discovery about the footage. While attempting to stop one recording at 10 minutes and 45 seconds, he mistakenly jammed the fast forward button down While the footage whizzed by, he attempted to pry up the button with a screwdriver. Just as he succeeded, the tape stopped at 32 minutes and 1 second. The intern actually fell out of his chair when he looked up at what was frozen on the screen. The image of a badly decomposed, severed head filling up the entire frame. After he collected himself, he moved the film back a few frames, then forward, and realized that his mind was not playing tricks on him. He began going through the rest of the recording and soon discovered that at exactly 12-minute intervals, the image would appear for one frame. Thinking it was some practical joke being played on the new guy, he presented it to one of the film technicians, ready to be mocked. The technician was just as puzzled as him. No one had touched the footage since the cancellation of the show. After the studio had closed for the night, the intern convinced the tech to help him go through all the tapes of the Words of Light. They discovered that every single episode had this same horrifying anomaly. They also realized that as the show progressed, the image had become more disgusting, as maggots began to eat away at the loose flesh, and pieces of hair and skin seemed to have fallen off exponentially. The tech made clear to the intern that what they were seeing was technically impossible, since the film itself showed absolutely no signs of splicing, and he himself had been at every filming of the show and knew of no time when this image could have been inserted into the frame. All of this was presented to the studio head, who, fearing some kind of backlash over allowing this to get on the air, ordered all the tapes destroyed. He told the intern and the tech that he had no interest in knowing who did it at this point, only that, to quote, "covering their collective asses is all that's important now." He demanded that they mention this to no one. The tech easily moved on, remembering the incident as a darkly funny personal anecdote, but the intern wouldn't let it go. He made copies of as many tapes as he could before they were wiped, and took them to see if he could find anything else in them that might point to who did this or why they would. A week later, he attempted to rope the tech into helping him again, saying that he believed he had discovered something even more disturbing than the images themselves. When the single frames were edited together in chronological order, the head's mouth appeared to be moving, as if trying to form words. The tech, fearing for his job, told him to get rid of the copies and to not talk about it again. A week later, police responded to a 911 call made by an elderly woman in one of the Atlanta suburbs at dusk. She had heard horrible noises coming from her next-door neighbor's house where a young couple lived. She told the emergency responder that the wife was pregnant and that she was terrified that something had happened. When the officers arrived on the scene 20 minutes later, they found no lights on in the windows and the front door ajar. They moved in slowly and made their way to the living room. Inside, they found a young woman dead, with her abdomen slashed open. The wound was jagged, and a trail of blood led from the body to the couch on the far end of the room. There sat her husband, the studio intern, naked, the corpse of his unborn child at his feet, dying. In his hand, he held the rusty piece of metal siding he had used to gut his pregnant wife. The television was on and playing an 18-second loop of the silent footage of a decomposing head mouthing some unintelligible words. The story at the police precinct to this day goes that the intern kept saying under his breath over and over again as they led him away, "The light of God calls them." So, was there really a link between the bizarre pandemic and the small local TV segment? Did this mysterious reverend have something to do with the mass hysteria? And was the stills really present during its airing? It's easy to misplace things every once in a while. However, when it consistently happens, it's easy to start developing paranoia. And this is exactly what happens to one person living alone in his apartment. There's something freeing about living alone. Some people crave the company of others, but since I work so much, I'm forced to interact with a wealth of people. So, it's nice to have a place where I can just hide away after a full day's grind. There is one nice advantage, though, about living with others. When strange things happen, you have someone to blame. For over a year of my life, I had an array of strange happenings, which made me start questioning my sanity. It started with my doors. I've never been too particular with whether I like a door to be left open or closed, so it was a while before I noticed. But after a while, I started to realize that some doors in my apartment weren't left the way I'd remembered. It was easy to forget. Working long hours means you're usually too exhausted to remember an inane detail like the position of a door from when I left in the morning to when I returned. However, after a while, I started to notice that a door I swear I had left ajar would be closed, and doors I felt I had closed prior would be open. It took multiple occurrences, but the more I noticed, the more I forced myself to remember. And the more I forced myself to remember, the more I realized I was right. It didn't just end with doors, though. In fact, this was just the start. I'm quite particular with keeping my fridge stocked. I always make sure there's enough food in there so I can relax when I get home and not worry about food. I also keep some indulgences in case I ever feel like treating myself or I have guests over. It was when I had a friend over that I saw something odd. While now in a more perceptive mood, I noticed that when I went to grab some beers, there was only 10 left from a 12-pack. We hadn't started drinking yet, and my friend said he hadn't touched the fridge since he arrived. This perplexed me, as I was adamant I hadn't touched a beer since I bought a new pack. However, memory is a funny thing when drinks are involved, so I accepted it as a sign that maybe I did drink them. Believing that was much easier than contemplating the more sinister alternatives. Later that month was when the true reality of how dire my situation was set in. I wasn't feeling well, and at work, it showed. My manager, as much as he appreciated my efforts, sent me home early to recover. The only thing keeping me focused on the drive back was the thought of lying in my bed and crashing. When I got home, however, things were off. Whilst exploring, I noticed some odd things. The throws on my chair were ruffled, and pillows were moved around. In front, the TV was left on and blaring some obscure show. My water glass, that I usually leave out full, was drained and moved to the other side of the counter, and the dining room chairs were all out of line. Everything felt off axis, and my mind raced with ideas. I felt like I was going crazy. I tried to downplay everything, that maybe I was in more of a daze than I thought while ill. But my mind was also drumming up some crazy theories, like I was leading a double life and not conscious of it, or something paranormal was at play. This much self-doubt was not healthy, so I decided to be proactive. When I was feeling better, I decided to set up a few cheap motion cameras to see if I could catch any movement firsthand. If nothing happened, then it was because I knew about the cameras and I'd know to get help. This bizarre reality was more palatable than what I would do if I found out it was something else. I linked the cameras up to my phone and left for work as usual. While at work, my phone buzzed with some notifications. The header made my world freeze. Motion detected. My heart sank. All that was racing through my mind was the daunting idea that my apartment was being burgled. I didn't feel any better after I tapped the notification and saw my camera took a few stills of a figure wandering my apartment, confirming that something real was happening and it wasn't just some glitch. I immediately contacted the police and caught my manager up with everything. He agreed to let me head out under the pretense that this was an emergency, and I hastily made my way. When I arrived, I saw the police cars blockading the front. After explaining who I was, they huddled me in and proceeded to tell me what they knew. They indeed found someone in my apartment. I felt like my heart stopped beating as they revealed this. They told me they were about to escort them out, and as they said this, I saw the police exit the building, accompanying a neat-looking, elderly woman. This made me furrow my brow somewhat. The officers that were in my apartment explained things a bit more. They told me, after an exhaustive search of the property, they found the woman hiding on top of a built-in cupboard designed to store bedding and mattresses. Apparently, behind the sliding door, she had laid out a thin futon and had several plastic drink bottles. There was just enough room for her to lay down, they added. They almost missed her, as when they found her, she was nervously curled up on her side. I was stunned. What's worse is that after the investigation, they found that, though she didn't steal any money, she had been living in my apartment for over a year, without me ever realizing. When you find things moved without remembering how, it can make the mind run with many ideas of what happened. However, sometimes the answers are more terrifying than the mystery. Is this story of a secret old lodger true, or just pulled from the fabric of fiction? Every town has its own structure surrounded in myth and legend. This next story is about an old cell phone tower, a large metallic monolith that holds a sinister tale. Near my house, there is a dense forest, and in the middle of that forest, a cell phone tower stands tall among the trees, rising higher than any other structure. Now, a cell phone tower is nothing extraordinary in 2015, but the legend that surrounds ours is unsettling at best. Because of the tower's location within the forest, it is rather inaccessible to most people. Even those who service the thing have a hard time getting to it with all their equipment. Nevertheless, it has been officially dubbed the Tower of Death by our town. The tower was state of the art for when it was built, and replaced an older tower which was smaller and nearing the end of its life cycle. As the legend goes, just 2 days after the tower was built, a young couple who, obviously under the influence, climbed to the top of the tower in hopes of taking a picture of the sunset as it descended over the town. As they reached the antenna cluster at the top, the girl was suddenly snagged on a cable and lost her footing, causing her to fall to the ground. She was killed upon impact. The male, devastated, also flung himself off. But instead of dying instantly like his lover, he survived just long enough to drown in his own blood. They died in agony and panic, never having even said their last words. Ever since, the tower refused to operate normally and would sometimes inexplicably cut out when the sun is setting. People have reported hearing faint sounds that resemble screams when calling on their phones. The various carriers which the tower served were soon notified of the strange occurrences and went to investigate. When they opened up the transceiver at the base of the antenna, they hastily replaced a lot of servers, switches, and other equipment that controlled the tower. One of the technicians claimed that they found droplets of fresh blood on the electronics, which was sealed inside a solid steel enclosure that was completely watertight. This all happened well after the death of the couple, and the structure surrounding the area was well cleaned from top to bottom long ago. Many assumed that maybe an animal had been killed near the antenna, or that the technician was making this whole thing up for attention. But others suspected something a little more disturbing. Despite the best efforts of the ISP, the tower still does not operate reliably. Technology and the paranormal is never a good mix. To outsiders, it's confusing why such a useful site is abandoned. But the locals know all too well why. So, now that we've listened to all three, let's see if you have what it takes to pull the truth out of the fiction. Comment below which story you think is true. Is it the first story of a mysterious broadcast ran by a local reverend, which, after the investigation of an employee, may have been linked to a series of misfortunate incidents? How about the second story, where, after a series of investigations of strange occurrences, came the discovery of an elderly woman living in the walls of an oblivious tenant for over a year? Or is it the strange history of tragedy surrounding the local cell phone tower, which has been rumoured to have started the malfunctions of the structure ever since? Feel free to pause the video now and lock in your answer in the comments below. If you predicted that it was story 2, you were right. This story was based on a real event that happened in Tokyo of a homeless woman who stowed away in various local addresses over a year. She was reported to not have stolen money and was eventually charged with trespassing. Did you get it right? Congratulations if you did. I will try to make it harder for the next episode. Until next time, where we determine if reality is stranger than fiction.